People used to treat me like I was invisible. Even when I was sitting in first class, I had paid $10,000 for that ticket. So why did the flight attendant, Margaret, look through me as if I was just a shadow on the cabin floor? Fresh off a grueling 3-day medical conference, I anticipated the luxuries of first-class travel, but all I felt was the sting of judgment. When I requested the lamb, Margaret delivered the words that still echo in my mind. "You'll have to wait." As I watched passenger after passenger around me blissfully enjoy their meal, my heart began to race. I felt erased, as if I didn't belong among the privileged. The pressure built, and then the moment came. A fellow passenger had an allergic reaction mid-flight. My instincts kicked in. I knew I had to act. I leaped from my seat, administering first aid as my training kicked into overdrive. In that heart-pounding chaos, I reclaimed my voice. I was not just a passenger, I was a healer. As the dust settled, Julian, my husband and the airline's CEO, walked into the lounge, concern etched into his face. After hearing my account of the incident, his gaze hardened with determination. Together we would rectify this injustice, starting with a decisive meeting that would hold those responsible accountable. Margaret lost her job that day, but more importantly, we laid the groundwork for the Price Initiative, an airline policy aimed at dismantling bias and ensuring every passenger, regardless of their appearance, received the treatment they rightfully deserved. Today, as I savor the lamb I finally got, I reflect on how powerful it is to reclaim your narrative. I invite you to consider your own stories of injustice. How will you stand up for equality?
"I'd like the lamb, please," she said, smiling despite the strained air around her. Margaret, the flight attendant, barely looked up from her tablet. "We don't have that available right now."
How about the chicken instead? But I ordered lamb. I can show you my ticket, the protagonist replied, determination battling with discomfort. Margaret's eyes narrowed. I said we don't have it. You'll eat what you're given. As the soup course was served, she watched helplessly as the 2 rows ahead of her received their lamb dishes, pleasure written across their faces. Heart pounding, she felt a flush creep to her cheeks. "Excuse me," she called, voice steady but faltering. "Can I speak to the purser?" Margaret snapped back. "What's the issue now?" "It's just that. Enough for you? You think you deserve something special?" The contempt in her tone echoed as the laughter of neighboring passengers pierced through the growing silence. "Actually, I'm a physician," she said, each word a stand against the humiliation that threatened to swallow her whole. "Sure you are," Margaret retorted, rolling her eyes. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." Suddenly, a sharp gasp. A passenger clutched his throat, an allergic reaction. She surged forward, instinct driving her as the world faded, her training kicking in. "I'm a doctor, move aside." Within minutes, the chaos settled into a shaky calm. With trembling hands, she wrapped the emergency kit around the man, her pulse finally steadying as the paramedics arrived. Just then, a familiar figure burst into the lounge. Julian, the airline CEO, his face a mask of concern as he scanned the room. "What happened?" His eyes found her, and his heart dropped when he saw the aftermath. She met his gaze, eyes shimmering with a mix of frustration and vindication. "I was ignored," she said, voice breaking. "What? By who?" he demanded, turning to the flight crew, his presence commanding. "Margaret," she uttered, and the tension thickened like fog. "She wouldn't serve me, just because—" Julian's expression hardened. "We don't tolerate discrimination, not on my watch." A calm by 4 days brought not just her vindication, but a new policy, the Price Initiative, aimed at eradicating bias within the airline's ranks. The lamb finally graced her tray later. She took a moment, savoring more than just the taste, but a hard-fought justice. "Isn't it funny," she mused quietly, staring at the meal that represented her truth, "how some meals come with a side of courage?" Much in that moment, the first taste of change didn't just satisfy her hunger. It ignited her spirit. The cabin felt stifling as she settled into her seat, the anticipation of first-class luxury swirling into a cocoon of discomfort. With her $10,000 ticket, she'd envisioned a refuge. Instead, the flight attendant, Margaret, barely acknowledged her presence, her eyes sliding over like ice skates on a frozen pond. A quick request for the lamb meal was met with a flick of disdain. Margaret's smile was a crescent moon, bright but distant. As the hours rolled on, her eyes wandered, each meal delivered around her table. Another plate of lamb, another silent confirmation of her place in this confined universe. The pang of forgotten orders mixed with disbelief. Am I invisible? She wondered, heart racing as anger wove tightly around her chest. Finally, she called for the purser, desperation clawing at her throat. But when Margaret approached again, she was a wall, solid and unyielding. You shouldn't expect too much in your class, she sneered, her condescension cutting deeper than any knife. The words echoed, amplifying the horror of realization. This wasn't a mere oversight, it was personal. A companion, chaos erupted. A passenger collapsed, gasping for breath. Instinct took over, and her medical training surged forward. With steady hands, she pushed through the onlookers, her heart pounding for the man who was now rising and falling with every breath. In that life or death moment, clarity settled within her. She was capable. She mattered, yet here it seemed she might still fade. And then Julian walked in, a beacon piercing through the dense fog of her frustration. Shock froze time as he scanned the room, his gaze landing directly on her. Instantly, concern broke his features. She didn't need words. His fierce protectiveness spoke volumes against the backdrop of her silent suffering. The energy shifted, the tide turning as her quiet storm finally found its voice. As the flight continued, the dull hum of engines seemed to pulse with her growing unrest. The second time Margaret passed her, the dismissive flicker of her eyes felt like a slap. "Excuse me," the protagonist said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I requested lamb, and I saw others receive their meals." Margaret shrugged, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "You must have misheard. You can't be serious." Her heart raced, but she stood tall, pushing past the initial wave of anger. "I'm an MD. I just finished 3 days at a medical conference. This is not how first-class service should be." The words hung in the air, charged with every ounce of her frustration, yet somehow she felt a spark ignite within her. She called for the purser and held her ground, not backing down despite Margaret's cutthroat smirk. Suddenly, chaos erupted when a passenger collapsed, gasping for air. Rushing to his side, she called on her training, guiding him through a series of breaths as the cabin filled with panic. "Stay calm," she instructed, her voice firm. "Help is coming." Without hesitation, she looked up and saw Julian, her husband, making his way through the crowd. Their eyes met, and he took in the scene with a fierce protectiveness. After the crisis, she explained everything: the meal request, the dismissive treatment, feeling invisible. When Julian turned to the crew with a commanding presence, she saw the tide beginning to shift. His voice held authority as he laid bare the gravity of the situation, demanding accountability. Margaret's resignation followed swiftly. "We won't tolerate discrimination," Julian declared, announcing sweeping changes. As the airline staff gathered, the whispers of a new initiative began to circulate, promising equality for all passengers. Later, sitting down with a freshly served plate of lamb, she couldn't help but smile at the small victory that felt monumental. "This is just the beginning," she stated quietly but confidently, savoring every bite, reflecting on how change begins with standing up, and how reclaiming her voice changed everything. The airplane's cabin buzzed with anticipation as the protagonist, a poised black woman, settled into her first-class seat. She had just spent 3 grueling days at a medical conference, and this flight was her reward, a $10,000 ticket that promised luxurious service and comfort. The soft hum of engines filled the air, but her excitement quickly fizzled when Margaret, the flight attendant, approached with an air of superiority. "What's your meal choice?" Margaret asked without making eye contact. When the protagonist confidently requested the lamb, Margaret's lips curled slightly in dismissive mockery. Sickly silent, the protagonist watched as other passengers around her reveled in exquisite meals, her stomach flipping with each passing tray. As the meal service continued, Margaret's prejudice became painfully clear. The protagonist's heart raced, not just from the humiliation, but from the boiling frustration of being overlooked, reduced to a mere shadow in a sea of privilege. When a male passenger suddenly collapsed, gasping for breath, the protagonist felt her training kick in. Instinctually, she leapt from her seat, navigating crisis with urgency and care. Using her skills to save a life even as she fought against the weight of bias, hanging thick in the cabin. Just as she breathed her last sigh of relief, the door swung open. Julian, the airline's CEO, and her husband strode in, his eyes locking onto hers with concern. The flight attendant paled when he approached, overhearing the whispers of what had occurred. The moment shifted, a silent power emerged. Julian demanded an explanation, his voice unwavering. As she recounted her experience, his fury turned to focus. "Margaret," he said, voice cold and decisive, "your behavior is unacceptable. You're done here." Gasps echoed through the cabin as she staggered back, the weight of his words unraveling her authority. With a firm resolve, Julian announced sweeping reforms. The Price Initiative aimed at eradicating bias and rebuilding trust within their airline. As he spoke, the protagonist felt a swell of pride. The injustice she endured would not just be a personal battle, it would catalyze systemic change. Later, she savored the lamb she had been denied, each bite a taste of triumph and justice. The contrast was stark. The silent celebration of a woman who fought for her dignity against the unraveling disgrace of the flight attendant. As the credits rolled, viewers couldn't help but reflect on the profound significance of equality and the power of standing up against discrimination. As I sit here, savoring the taste of lamb that once felt so far from my reach, I can't help but reflect on that chaotic day. The seemingly simple act of ordering a meal turned into a battle against an unseen wall of bias. I thought my qualifications and ticket price meant something, yet I was reduced to shadows in someone else's perception. But as unfair as that moment was, it unveiled a deeper strength within me. I learned that courage doesn't just rise at the moment we face adversity, but often grows quietly in the aftermath when we choose to reclaim our narrative. My husband's support was a fortifying force, but it was my resilience that turned a moment of humiliation into a stepping stone for change. So I ask you, do you think I went too far? What would you have done in that situation? Have you ever had someone treat you like that? Your stories matter, share them below. Let's foster a dialogue about justice and equity. Together, we can ignite change.